Alright, welcome back guys. Today we are going to be talking about this optic right here. Now this is a CVLife. This is the WolfCovert M04, I believe is the model. I'll insert links and everything in the description below, but I want to give a kind of overview and my experience of this optic and kind of go over what I think about it. They make a couple different versions. This is a larger one, so as you can see here it has kind of a larger window. I'm always skeptical of pistol red dots that are less than $100 because I've had some bad experience with some of the cheaper ones out there, and if you go to the really cheap ones, they're basically made for airsoft and they can't really survive on pistols. But kind of what I'm finding is if you buy a red dot and it's around $100 or more and it's a pistol red dot, you're probably going to be fine. I think the same is true probably of most rifle red dots at this point. With rifle red dots, because they're a little bit bigger, they're a little bit more durable just because everything's a little bit more chunky. So you can kind of get away with cheaper red dots for rifles, but when it comes to pistol mounted options, you're kind of somewhere around that $100 mark, or at least you used to be if you wanted something that was durable. Everything is getting better and better and better as the years go on, so most things, if you buy it and it's somewhere around $100, you're probably going to be safe, and this one is no different. So full disclosure, this company did send this optic out to me. I don't do paid reviews. They send me the optic and I do a review on it and I give you my honest opinion. And my honest opinion of this one, there were some growing pains. So I wasn't a fan of this optic initially because I was having some problems with it. And there are some things that I think the company should change or kind of add to the package to kind of make it a better, more user-friendly, I'll just say, because they include a lot of things in the box. And you can see it comes with a box, it comes with an RMR or a MOS plate that's for an RMR mount. It comes with a couple screws, cleaning cloth, the little cap. It comes with a little instruction booklet. It comes with 2 sets of batteries, which I thought was a nice touch. And it comes with all these different screws. Now, I was excited because it came with all the different screws until I found out the screws are kind of just the industry standard screws that you would use with, say, like an RMR and with the body of an RMR. The problem is with this one, the body and the screw holes and everything, the dimensions aren't exactly the same as an RMR, so this one's a little bit taller. As you can see, the optic here, compared to something else that's like, maybe like this one would be more RMR-ish, and you can see the screw holes are a lot farther down than this is. So this one can use the shorter screws a little bit easier, versus this one, needs a little bit longer screws. So that was an issue I ran into because the screws that they include for the 440, specifically for the Zev cut, if you're familiar with this, this is a Zev cut slide, and this is a Brownell slide. I don't know who actually cuts it for them. It could be Zev Technologies, and yes, I do know my rear sights on their backwards. That's because I hate the white. I like having blacked out rear sights, and all you gotta do is flip the thing around. It doesn't matter. It's basically the same thing. So if you're familiar with this, it has a post here, and because the post and the screw hole is the same, it uses a smaller screw. And the screw that you use with that is the 440. Now this one is a 6mm, which, as you can see on here, I wrote is too short. So these screws would probably work fine with an RMR or something that's the same body size. But for this one, it was too short. So whenever I would take those 440 screws and I would screw them into here, obviously it would not be mounted on this plate, but whenever I would mount it or try to mount it to that slide over there, I would get maybe at best a quarter turn on those screws before I was completely maxed out on how tight I could get it. And a quarter turn is barely any thread engagement whatsoever. So obviously those were a no-go. So I was like, well, that's kind of odd. There's no other screws that they included. So I test all the other screws thinking maybe one of them is mislabeled or, but they're still 440. Nope, there's not. They're all the larger size screws. So none of those other ones work. So I contacted them and said, hey, this is an issue. The 440 screws that come with it can't be used on anything. And they basically just said, these screws are, what we ship with it because that's kind of the industry standard. And I'm not a fan of that. So full disclosure again, I tell you what I think. So in my opinion, talking to the company, if you want to improve the product, include the correct length of screws. The 440 thread pitch is correct. But if you want the screws to actually be able to work, you need to get something like this. So I ordered these screws, paid for these myself, ordered them off eBay. I don't remember who I got them from. They were like, $8, something like that. They weren't super expensive. But this is just a variety of the 440 screws, and these are the 5/16 length. Hopefully you can read this and it's not super reflective, but these are 5/16 lengths screws, and these work perfectly with that optic. So if you buy this optic and you're expecting to use it on a ZEV slide plate, or not slide plate, but a ZEV slide or a ZEV cut slide, just know you're going to have to buy some aftermarket screws. Or if you already have some 440 by 5/16 laying around, you can use those, and these work perfectly. I was able to get almost 2 full rotations, which I'm happy with. Anything over 1 full rotation I think is necessary. If you can get to 2 full rotations, I think that's perfect. Any more than that and you start running into where this hole is, it kind of runs into the extractor bar in here, and it'll kind of bind that up, making it where the extractor can't work, so the plunger. Anyway, so you don't really want screws that are longer than that. So that's what I would recommend. And again, something I would like to see this company do is include the 5/16 screws instead of these, because these can't be used with this optic. Now, you do have these, if you have another optic, you might be able to use these. So it's not like these are useless. You could use them with something else, but they're just not usable with this. So if you buy this, just know out of the box, this will only work with an RMR or a traditional RMR cut slide, or RMR plates, like this, that use the larger screws. Now, another issue I ran into, and again, I'm just going to get all the negatives out of the way first, because I do like this optic and I think it's worth the money, but I want to talk about all the negatives first. So one thing I noticed in their instruction book, let's see if I can find it on here. Yes, so right here, the screws that they include, right here, the length screws, it says a 632 by 9 millimeters, and those are the ones that go into, they claim, into this RMR plate. Now the problem is, whenever you screw those shorter 9 millimeter screws into here, you get, again, maybe a quarter to a half turn before you just completely run out of thread engagement, and that is not enough. Now what I did notice is the screws that mount it directly to the Picatinny rail section are plenty long, and you can see they don't stick out of the bottom at all. They're perfect when you mount it to the included, which I like, the included RMR plate. So essentially the 632 by 9 millimeter screws that they include they can't be used for anything. It's these screws right here. They're too short for the plate, so they may as well not even include these, or just include a second set of the 10.5 millimeter screws, because these screws that are in here work perfectly with this MOS plate. So is that a big deal? No. That's something they just need to change in the manual, and it's something they need to, just kind of include in the box. The little small things, but small things can make or break a deal for some people. So again, just use the screws that come with this mount for this mount as well. They're both the same screws. All right, so now that I've talked about all the negative things, let's get into what comes in this package. So you get a box, very typical. You get the red dot itself, as you can see, and it does have the battery mounted on top, which I like. You don't have to re-zero your optic by taking the entire thing off your slide. You can just unscrew this, put in your new battery, and you're off to the races. It does come with 2 batteries, and as you can see on here, it uses the 1632 batteries, which is standard. I like it. The clicks on here are audible and tactile. You can feel them. They're not like mushy or super hard. They feel perfectly fine. The buttons on here are they stick out a little bit, but I didn't ever accidentally hit one. So it does come with the RMR plate, MOS adapter plate as well, which is a nice touch. Is it the highest quality plate? It's not going to be, not for the price, but again, for less than $100, you're getting all of these things, which, a lot of the companies charge you, $75 just for this plate. So I thought it was nice that they include it. And if you want a better one, you can buy a better one. It's not a big deal. But for the price, and what this is, it's not like you're going to be using this, for serious or hard use. But it is there. Comes with a clean cloth. Comes with a little, cover if you so desire. I probably won't use most of that stuff. It comes with all of these screws over here, and they list link screws online. It comes with M4 screws, M3.5, the 440 screws, M3, and the 632s. And they comes in various lengths to work with various mounts. Now, what would I compare this to? So I would compare this to options, like the CVLife, the CT2. I would compare this to kind of the UTG. They have like a little RMR kind of looking pistol red dot that I reviewed, and it's probably my favorite lowest cost option that I've seen so far. And I would say this one is probably, I would say it's on par with that one. The UTG one actually held zero slightly better, as in it didn't lose zero at all. And this one, I had some growing pains with it, but ultimately it did hold zero fairly well. It lost zero by like 1 inch, I think, at about 15 yards after I just banged the snot out of it, racking it off the wood, which I'll show you. But for the price of this thing, that's acceptable to me because it was still in the bullseye at 15 yards. So it just barely moved a little bit. And for pistol distances, that's not really all that big of a problem because I'm not going to use this on like a duty gun, for instance. So let's give it some aggressive. And for good measure. All right, let's go test it out. You can see the glass did not break, so that's a plus. All right, wood table. Let's see how it does. All right, now let's test out the accuracy again, see if it lost zero. All right, so here's after racking it. That one was 100% me, and that one was 100% me. So those are, my fault. So here's the grouping after. I have a fairly tight group and a couple right here, and I believe there's an extra one in here somewhere. So the zero went from, roughly there to more a little bit left. So I would say it moved, at 10 yards, it moved about 1 inch to the left. Sorry, hopefully I didn't get too close, but it moved about 1 inch to the left after that test. So to me, I'm not surprised because the up and down turrets, or adjustments, the detents in them feel stronger and more tactile versus the ones in the left to right adjustments. The windage feels a little bit weaker and not as positive. So I'm not surprised that it moved, but for the price of the optic, that's actually not bad. Now that I'm using screws that hold it in, substantially tighter, that problem seemed to have gone away. Would I use this for duty? No, just because it did shift zero. It's not a big shift, but 12 yards, that's not that big of a deal. But you're looking at 2, maybe 3 inches, if you go out to 25, 30 yards, something like that. And if you have to take that shot, that distance can matter because you have the size of someone's head. If you just pull a little bit to the left and then the optic is off that much more, you could miss entirely. So that's why that to me is important. Now for a range gun, yeah, seems fine. For something that's not going to get heavy use or abuse, yeah, seems like it'd probably be a pretty good option. You just gotta have to make sure to find screws for it that work with your slide if the screws that they provide don't work. But first things first, let me take these screws out so you can see some of the tolerances issues that you might run into and that I did run into, which caused some inaccuracy issues. The screws I initially tried using on this optic to mount it to my Brownell slide over here were some smaller ones that came with, I believe it came with this optic, the Siley, because I have the witness marks right there, the gold, and the screws were a little bit too small, at least that like the head of the screw was, so it wasn't getting good metal on metal like contact engagement kind of around the top right here, or at least that's what I suspect was happening. And I'll insert footage at some point so you can kind of see what problems I was dealing with. And so because those weren't holding it, perfectly, solid, the entire optic was shifting slightly. Now, normally that shouldn't be a problem because the screws, all they're doing is holding the optic down. They're not keeping it from shifting left or right. The problem I had was the tolerances. So with this optic specifically, these holes are, supposed to be a certain size, and then these holes up here are supposed to be a certain size as well. And the Brownell slide, as you can tell, does not have the front ones. So, you could say that's part of the issue. It could be. But the tolerances, as you can tell, if I put it on here, it fits, and it fits well. You can see it just kind of hangs over just a little bit. And I like the fact that this sticks out a little bit, protects the glass. But there's some wiggle, and there's some slop there. And that was the problem I was having. The screws that I had, again, were not being relied on solely for holding the optic down. They were also being relied on keeping it from shifting back and forth. And then just so you can see, the optic, not loose. Screws are still in the same place they were. So I'm at 10, maybe 11 yards at this point. I'm shooting at a full size target, just because I want to see if maybe my brain is doing something weird, but I don't know, we'll see. At work, during qualifications, we shoot 50 rounds into a target this size, from 15 yards, 7 yards, and 3 yards, and various amounts of rounds at each distances and one-handed and whatnot. I can get all of those rounds as long as I'm doing my part with iron sights in the 10 with, I'll put probably maybe 10 of those rounds in the 9 total. So I usually get somewhere around a high 480s, around a 490 generally, if I'm doing my part with iron sights. With a red dot, I can stack rounds at this distance on top of each other in the red with every other red dot I've used. So if these are not going at least in the 10 from here, and I'm going to take my time, you're going to watch. If I jerk it, call me out. So if I get any in the 9 at this point that I don't call myself, then it's the optic. That was not me. Did I jerk that one? I don't know, you tell me. It's down low right. I never jerk low right. It jumped again. All right, I'm gonna show you this. Hopefully you can see. All right, here's my first couple rounds, and then it moved over here, and I was like, well, maybe that was just, me get better trigger pull. The last 2 rounds are over here. It jumped from here to here, and I know I'm not doing that. I'm gonna shoot the rest of this ammo that I have. Why not? It's roughly the same distance, I think. We'll find out. Yeah, it was about here-ish. Hopefully you can still see it. Yeah, probably about there. That was a good trigger pull. That was high right. At least it felt like a good trigger pull. Maybe I'll see. Now we're back over where I was on the left-hand side. I think it's on the left-hand side again. That was me. I jerked that one left. Settled back to where I initially started. And I'm out. Okay. None of those last ones jumped anywhere. And I'll show you how tight my group is. Hopefully you can see this. It's hard to tell with the camera in the sun. This is my group. I know all of these trigger pulls were good. And these are, if I maybe jerked it slightly, maybe that one was me jerking it slightly. These were the 2 I told you about earlier. Here's a random one that just kind of jumped up on its own. I don't know where that came from. This is only 10 yards. And I know all of my good trigger pulls are all right here. And these were both good trigger pulls. So they should have been over here. So this optic is moving. So now, once I bought some aftermarket screws and I bought these, that problem completely went away. And these, as you can tell on here, the head on these screws are pretty good size. And so they had much better engagement with the optic itself. And once I put those on, it did not lose 0 at all, except whenever I did a torture test on it when it only moved 1 inch. So if you buy those screws, you're not going to run into that problem. All right, so here's with the CVLife red dot. This was my first grouping. This was me just trying to figure out where 0 was. But first group, those were me. So that was actually pretty tight. So I brought it up to where 1, 2, 3 was the next one. So I brought it left a little bit, and I'm only about 10 yards. So I want it a little bit low so it's more on at 25. And then my next shots were here. So at the moment it's holding 0. I use new screws and they seem to be working. Granted, I've only fired, 20 rounds so far. I'll keep shooting it a little bit and see how it does. All right, so this is around 12 yards. I just set it in at this distance. I'm not leaving it on this gun, so I'm not going to sight it in. So here's 10 rounds, I believe, if I counted correctly. That one was me. I know that was me. And then these two were questionable trigger pulls, and I knew I did that. So the rest of these all held in perfect, and I'm not in the most stable position, but I'm in a fairly stable position. So the fact that it's not moving at all is a good sign. This up here, I also felt like I was in a pretty stable position. Those felt like good trigger pulls. Not sure what that was about, but I switched ammo to see if maybe that was an issue, because I was using the Palmetto State Armory AAC stuff, and it was giving me some inconsistency. So I decided to switch to the Blazer brass to see if that would resolve any of my issues. And it appears that the Blazer brass stuff is a little bit more accurate. So whether or not, that explains these two, I don't know. But the optic seems to be holding zero now. So using correct screws seems to resolve the problem. But I say that, and to show you comparison, here is the Nightwing. This is how it should fit on here. So if you put this on, that's on there. There is basically zero slop. Does not move at all. So the tolerances on this are very tight and are correct. So the screws, even if they were the wrong size, they're only going to be holding it down. You don't have to worry about this one losing zero because of that. Now let's try the CVLife. The CVLife moves a little bit, but not as bad as this one. You can see there's more wiggle. Now this one is, double the price, and this one's, I think, a little bit more expensive. But just know you're paying for quality control. You're paying for how well things are in the tolerance standpoint. Is that a big deal? No. Buy the screws for $8 and solves that problem. And for those of you who want to use the MOS adapter plate that it comes with, here I inserted, and I did not torque down, but they're pretty tight. I would say they're probably, you might get another eighth of a rotation at most. But as you can see, they're not quite flush. They stick out just a little bit, which is going to cause them to kind of push the plate up a little bit. Not a huge deal, but just know if you're going to use these screws that they include, which these are the 10.5 millimeters, you're going to have to file these down just ever so slightly to get them to be flush. Not a big deal, again, for the price point. But if you use the other screws that they have, which I think are, I want to say they're 9 millimeters or something like that. Yeah, they're over here, 9 millimeters. If you use these, again, you get maybe a quarter the rotation of thread engagement, which, again, is not enough. So not a big deal. Grind these down ever so slightly, and then it'll work fine with this plate. Now, all that said, would I recommend this optic? I still would. I still think there are other options out there that are probably better, but a lot of those options don't come with, all the features, that this one does. So this comes with the features, but it's lacking in some of the quality control, I would say. So it kind of depends on what you want. Do you want something that you don't mind tinkering with, grinding down a couple screws, or if you have some screws laying around, then, this is a clear-cut winner. If you don't want to deal with tinkering, then, you could go another route, pay a little bit more. So it's kind of up to you, what you're going to use this for. In my opinion, what I would use this for is kind of if you just want a optic for a range gun, or maybe you have a competition gun, or, just a nightstand gun, something like that. It's not going to have a whole lot of heavy abuse. You're just going to shoot it, either for fun or just every now and then, but you're not going to torture test the thing. It's not going to be out there, getting slammed on the ground or whatever. This optic will work fine because, again, it does have that large window. So if you want a large window, this is probably the cheapest one on the market that I've seen that actually has a large window like this. And it's not cheaply made. Like, I've used enough of these now where I can kind of feel, when something's going to cheap or break easily or whatever. And this one's not cheap. It's very similar to all the others. The adjusters on here, as I mentioned earlier, are very tactile. You can feel them. They only moved whenever I just beat the snot out of this thing, racking against the wood beam. So there is one negative, I guess you could say, is in here. They don't include, there's no glass, I guess, protecting the emitter right here. It's just open on the inside. I don't know if you can see that or not. But some other optics, like, say, this one right here, I don't know if you can see that in there. But inside of here, protecting that emitter is a little glass lens. Now, that can distort the emitter a little bit, which is a problem with this one. But that glass, little tiny glass lens protects, dirt and crap from getting inside this optic. So if you were to take this out in the rain or whatever, it's not going to, keep the rain out. So, that area could get flooded, and then, your emitter basically doesn't work at that point. Now, this is, kind of, it's not necessarily waterproof. You're not going to go down and, scuba diving with this thing. But, something like rain or whatever, it's not going to damage the thing. I've submerged optics like this completely in water, and they still work just fine. But just know, it's going to fill up with water, so that could potentially cause problems. So another use you could have for this, if you wanted to piggyback it on something like, an LPVO, this would be a good low option that's not super high. And that is something I kind of like about this mount. It's just tall enough to where you can get it on a Picatinny rail section, and it would be a little bit lower than this, but it just barely clears that turret. So this is a nice option if you want, to piggyback a red dot on top, but you don't want to, have to get a giraffe neck in order to use it. Or you could buy like a, T-Rex arms, 45-degree offset, mount that kind of goes off to the side over here or on the other side, and it would work for that as well. I think this would be a good option for that since the window is so large. It's easier to find, because what I've noticed with red dots, while I prefer a smaller window when it comes to being mounted on a pistol, I prefer a larger window like this when it's mounted on an LPVO. So, and again, when this thing is only around $90, and that's with it not on sale, that's just, Amazon price. If you look for sales, sometimes you can get it cheaper than that, or discount codes or whatever. I think this is a pretty good option for that. So don't let the beginning of the review, scare you away from it. I just wanted to be as honest as possible with some of the shortcomings that I've found. Again, for less than $100, this is probably, this is my top 2 options that I've seen out there so far. The UTG, and then this being, kind of a second place. And they're kind of, reversible depending on what you're looking at. So if y'all have any questions about this specifically, or think, I messed something up, or maybe I didn't understand something, let me know in the comments down below. If you want to see a torture test on, all of these different optics that I have, this is only half of them. I have like 3 or 4 of them in the house somewhere. I can do that as well, because it can kind of be fun. But I appreciate y'all watching. Like, subscribe, comment really helps people find the channel. Share it with people. If you see something that's, maybe you think I'm being a moron, or maybe you think it's interesting, or you learn something, share it with people. That helps as well. Anyways, I hope you all have a good one.